Hello friends, welcome to ASP.NET tutorial. In this sub-series, we are going to learn about browser cookies. In this very first video, we will get introduced to cookies and you will get some basic knowledge on session cookie as well as persistent cookie in this sub-series. Alright, now let us proceed with this video. Cookies store web server related information in the client machine where browser is running. So there are two parts here. One is web server and another one is the browser, which is rendering the page from the web server, right? Web server will transfer the content through HTTP protocol that will reach the browser, and browser will render the page. So here cookies store web server related information inside client browser. So if there are multiple users, you will see an advantage. Why? Because you are not storing all the client related information in the server and occupying the disk space of the web server. Instead, you are storing the information in the browser itself. This is useful to save space on the server's storage because informations are stored in the client browsers, right? When server is sending the response, we know that server will send the response and browser will perform the request, right? The object that is moving from client browser to web server is the request, and the object that is moving from the client, the web browser, the server to the web browser is the response. We know the request response cycle, right? Browser sends the request and web server sends the response back to the request. When server is sending the response, it will request the client browser to store the cookie, right? So the response will have the information to indicate the browser that it's a request from the web server to store some cookie in the client machine. So as part of the response, browser will the web server will place that request. Upon seeing that cookie request, web browser will store that inside the client PC. When client is sending the request again, right? So second request, let's say. So first request gone, web server talked back to the browser and browser sees that there is a request to store the cookie. It will store it, and when it is sending the request again, when it is in the sense when the web browser is sending the request again, it will send the cookie information back to the server. So if you see, this is web browser, web server. So if you see here, this is a web server. The web server can be any web server. It can be a IIS web server or Wildfly web server. So whatever is the web server that receives the request from the browser, or the browser is sending the first request here. So then browser, the web server sees there is a need for storing some client information. So it will send the cookie request back to the web server, right? This cookie request goes as part of the response. So the browser sees that there is a request from the web server. So in its internal storage, right, let's say in some disk, it stores that cookie information, right? If you see here, the information occupies space on the client browser, right? So the client browser, and in the disk it claims some space for the browser, and the cookie information is stored here. When browser is sending the subsequent request, it will take the cookie request and sends that back to the server. So this way, the web server, it will not store client related information here. So it will request us to store that in the client machine. Now imagine that there is a Amazon sales website, right? So in the online retail store, let's say there is a web server for that, and there will be multiple clients, right? And if web server want to store some client related information, it needs to allocate space for all the million customers. Instead, if it requires to store the information in the browser itself this way, then the space can be saved here, right? Also, in client perspective, the user specific information will be stored here, right? If user 1 is sending the request, only his specific information will be stored, right? So this way we can save space on the web server. The cookies are browser specific. The cookie created by IE cannot be seen by Chrome. So here, when we are talking about web server asking the browser to store the cookie information, the cookie information is browser specific. Let's say here the web server is abc.com, right? And when user is browsing that through Chrome, right, and when a cookie is stored, the stored cookie is specific to Chrome browser. If the same user is accessing the site abc.com through Microsoft Edge, then the information will not be available. So that's why here we are stating the cookie is browser specific. So if Chrome created the cookie, it will be seen by the Chrome only. When you use the same Chrome to browse the abc.com, it will send the request and cookie back to the web server. When you use a different web server, it will not see the cookie related to Chrome. The cookies are web server specific as well for security reason. When a cookie for Yahoo is stored in client machine, other web server cannot access it. Here we are talking about abc.com, right? abc.com Chrome, right? So it stores cookies specific to abc.com, the Chrome browser, right? So this abc.com web server can access cookie which is specific to abc.com. So if there is some other website, yahoo.com, when you are browsing it through the yahoo.com, yahoo.com cannot claim the cookie stored by abc.com. So that's what here we are stating. The cookies are web server specific as well for security reason. When a cookie for Yahoo is stored in client machine, other web server cannot access it, right? So if you see, when Yahoo is asking to store the cookie, so let's state that Yahoo is asking to store a cookie. So the cookie is stored here in the web browser, Edge browser, right? We already talked about the cookie that is browser specific. Now let's state that we are using only the Edge browser, right? Yahoo is sending the cookie and that get stored here. Then MSN is asking to store the cookie, right? Then cookies for MSN also stored here. Now if you look at the user 1 and Edge browser perspective, there are two web server information, cookie information is stored here in the disk. So the browser knows that this cookie belongs to Yahoo and this one belongs to MSN. So here MSN cannot claim the cookie here, the cookie for Yahoo. Similarly, Yahoo cannot claim the cookie for MSN. So when subsequent requests are sent, the browser is smart enough to know that this is for Yahoo and this one is for Edge, and it will pick and sends that back. However, it is advisable not to store sensitive information on the client browser. Even though here we are talking about the security reason, other browser cannot access the information, it is always advisable not to store sensitive information on the client browser. That means here we are stating not to store in the sense in web server perspective. When you are writing the web server code, do not request the browser to store the sensitive information like username, password, or credit card information, all those stuff. In this subseries, we will learn about cookies with examples. In this subseries, we will learn about cookies with examples. There is no demo in here. Thank you for watching. Bye.